Could you spend a night on the open prairie when the icy wind knocks you off your feet and the temperature drops to critical levels? Imagine an endless snowstorm where visibility is limited to arm's length, and you have neither a tent nor a warm home. In such conditions, the indigenous peoples of the Great Plains and northern forests honed their survival skills over many centuries. They turned the deadly cold into their ally, using their deep knowledge of nature and the physics of materials. Their methods were not random, but rather a complex system of actions honed to perfection. Watch the video to the end to learn how a handful of dry grass and a piece of rawhide saved lives where modern man would not have lasted an hour. First, I will reveal a secret that changes everything we know about the winter cold. The indigenous peoples of the Great Plains did not perceive winter storms as enemies, but as part of the natural cycle of life. They did not have the opportunity to build stone walls in the middle of the open prairie while hunting. Every minute of their existence at that time was subject to strict rules for conserving internal energy. A warrior's life depended on his ability to quickly assess the direction of the wind and the density of the snow. They understood that fighting the elements directly led to a rapid loss of strength and inevitable death. Instead of openly confronting the storm, they chose the tactic of gradually adapting to the conditions. Every movement was calculated so as not to cause excessive sweating, which is fatal in the cold. Wet skin cools down much faster than dry skin, and the Indians knew this rule better than anyone. Patience and cold calculation became their main weapons in the struggle for life. Preparation for winter journeys began in the warm season, when the necessary materials were gathered. Lakota and Cheyenne hunters knew in advance which areas of the terrain would provide them with the best natural shelter. They studied the habits of animals, which were also seeking refuge from the icy breath of the mountains in winter. Nature itself suggested the best solutions for setting up temporary shelters. Without this fundamental knowledge, no one could survive in the open field. An important aspect was the psychological readiness to spend long hours completely motionless under a layer of snow. The Indians cultivated endurance of spirit, which allowed the body to work in a heat-saving mode. Panic was out of the question, as it causes the heart to beat faster and consume resources more quickly. Calmness helped them enter a state close to controlled suspended animation. It was this inner strength that allowed them to greet the dawn after the most terrifying night. Clothing materials were chosen with particular care, taking into account their ability to breathe and retain lint. Bison hides obtained in late autumn had the thickest and warmest fur, ideal for winter. Every detail of their wardrobe had a purpose and was not a random decorative element. The Indians created multi-layered protection systems, which we now call high-tech equipment. It was true survival engineering, created from natural components. In the midst of an endless storm, even the most experienced hunter could lose his bearings. However, their knowledge of the stars and the features of the landscape allowed them to find their way even with minimal visibility. They navigated by the slope of tree branches in the shape of snowdrifts left by the wind. Every rustle and every change in air pressure carried important information. The world around them was an open book, written in the language of survival. The social structure of the tribe also played a huge role in ensuring the safety of each of its members. The experience of the elders was passed on to young warriors through stories and practical instruction around the campfire. Knowledge of how to survive a blizzard was more valuable than gold or weapons. One mistake could cost the entire group their lives, so discipline was ironclad. The collective mind of the tribe accumulated the wisdom of centuries, weeding out ineffective methods. The Indians knew how to find food even where the ground was frozen and hidden under deep snowdrifts. They knew which roots and tree bark could provide enough energy to maintain their metabolism. Energy was the fuel for their internal fire, which had to stay lit until morning. Proper nutrition before bedtime in the snow was as important as having a warm skin. Without calories, the body simply could not generate heat to warm the limbs. When sleeping under the open sky, Native Americans often used their horses as an additional source of heat. The animals were placed on the windward side, creating a living barrier against the icy gusts of wind. Horses were also sensitive to changes in the weather and could warn their owners of approaching danger. This symbiosis between man and beast was the basis of life on the Great Plains at all times. The horse was not just a means of transportation, but a faithful companion in times of trouble. Do you think this survival tactic was more effective than using modern tents? Share your opinion in the comments below this video. We are very interested to hear your thoughts on these ancient methods of the northern peoples. Subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on new exciting stories about the lives of Native Americans. Your support helps us create even better and more in-depth content. Want to know the main secret of how to turn the cold into your protector and loyal ally? Many people mistakenly believe that snow is only a source of cold and dampness for humans. Indigenous peoples of the subarctic, such as the Cree and Athabascan, saw snow as the perfect building material. It has excellent thermal insulation properties due to the large amount of air between snowflakes. A properly constructed snow shelter could maintain a temperature at freezing point, even when it was minus 40 degrees outside. The process of creating a shelter began with finding a sufficiently deep and dense snowdrift in the forest. If there was no natural snowdrift, the Indians piled up a large mound of snow by hand and gave it time to set. This process was called snow sintering, when ice crystals bond together under their own weight. Only then did they begin to hollow out the interior so that the walls would not collapse on the sleeper. The resulting dome shape was incredibly strong and resistant to hurricane-force winds. The entrance to such a shelter was always located below the floor level where the person slept. It's simple physics. Cold air is heavier than warm air, and it accumulated in this peculiar pit. The heat emitted by the hunter's body rose and was trapped under the dome, creating a comfortable zone. The Indians made a tiny hole in the ceiling to allow fresh air to flow in and carbon dioxide to escape. Such ventilation was vital to prevent suffocation during long periods of sleep in a confined space. If there was no time to build a dome, the Indians used a method of digging a trench in the snow. The bottom of such a trench was lined with a thick layer of coniferous branches to insulate it from the cold ground. The pit was covered with poles, pieces of leather, or simply thick layers of compressed snow. In such a snowbed, the warrior was protected from the wind, which is the main factor in rapid frostbite. The main thing was not to let the snow touch the skin directly so that it would not get wet from body heat. For extra comfort, the Indians used portable mats made of dried grass or bark. These materials did not absorb moisture and created an air layer between the body and the icy bed. Cedar or willow bark was especially popular because of its flexibility and good thermal properties. Sometimes stones heated in a fire and wrapped in pieces of old leather were placed under the mat. This provided gentle heating for several hours, helping to warm up and fall asleep faster. Interestingly, Native Americans avoided sleeping in river valleys, where cold air accumulates in stagnant lakes. They preferred hillsides where air movement prevents temperatures from dropping to extreme levels. Also, the snow on the hills is usually cleaner and denser, which is important for construction. Each tribe had its own secrets for the location of its winter camp, passed down from generation to generation. This knowledge was the result of thousands of years of observing the behavior of nature during harsh winters. In the next chapter, you will learn how Native Americans used the secrets of living fire in these icy dwellings. We will talk about how to build a fire right inside a snow house without risking its collapse. This knowledge was available only to the most experienced survivalists who knew how to control the elements. Snow construction is only part of their vast experience in exploring the wildlands of the North. Stay with us to uncover all the secrets of the great masters of the prairies and forests. Are you ready to find out what item the Indians considered more valuable than the sharpest knife on a winter hike? In the next chapter, we will discuss the unique tools that helped them make fire out of nothing. This will be a basic question that each of you can answer for yourselves. How did they cope with this terrible weather when they didn't even have simple matches? Read on and you will see striking examples of human ingenuity and the will to win. You've probably never heard of this unique secret, which concerns survival tactics when being pursued in a storm. When a group of warriors found themselves in open terrain under enemy fire and exposed to the elements, they used a method of dispersal. Each warrior went his own way, leaving a minimum of traces on the rocky areas that were blown by the wind. This forced the pursuers to waste precious time and energy trying to find the main group. In a blizzard, the tracks were covered in minutes, making the chase completely pointless and dangerous. The secret of this method lay in a prearranged meeting place, which could be many miles away. The Indians used landmarks that were visible only to those in the know. a particular rock formation, or the slope of a solitary tree. In a storm, when the world turned into a white wall, they relied on their inner sense of direction. This skill was developed from childhood through constant training and close connection with the landscape. They literally felt the ground with their feet, even if it was hidden under a thick layer of snow. If a warrior realized that he would not make it to the gathering place in time, he would use a technique of instant shelter. He would find a small depression behind a rock and curl up into a ball, covering himself with his heavy skin. The wind quickly covered him with snow, turning him into an inconspicuous white mound that enemies could pass by. Under the snow, the temperature remained stable, and the bison fur prevented body heat from escaping into the atmosphere. It was the art of being invisible and invulnerable at the same time, merging with nature itself. An important role in such camouflage was played by the color of clothing, which often matched the colors of the winter prairie. White and gray skins made a person practically invisible against the backdrop of icy fields and snow-covered rocks. The Indians knew how to move silently, without disturbing the integrity of the snow cover where it was critical. They knew how to use shadows and terrain to remain in the blind spot of any observer. The tactic of invisibility saved thousands of lives in an era of endless wars and colonial conquests. Interestingly, the Apache and Comanche could even use their horses for camouflage by laying them on the ground. The animals were trained to lie motionless at their owner's command until the danger passed. In a storm, this combination of man and horse became a single snowdrift that did not arouse suspicion. The horse provided warmth, while the man provided protection and control of the situation during this difficult period. It was the highest expression of trust between a warrior and his faithful companion in harsh conditions. When the storm subsided, the warrior had to quickly leave his shelter so as not to freeze in immobility. He began with active gymnastics right under the snow, warming up his arm and leg muscles before going outside. After that, he made his way outside and continued on his way to the meeting point, navigating the changed landscape. The ability to recover quickly after a long stay in the cold was a key survival skill. The Indians knew that life is movement, especially when permafrost reigns around you. Please like this video if you are impressed by the resilience and cunning of these great warriors of the past. We strive to find the most unusual facts for you that are not written in ordinary history textbooks. Your approval motivates us to continue our research and share it with the world. Every like helps this video get recommended and tells more people about Native American culture. Help us preserve the memory of these unique methods of survival in the wild. For the warriors of the Great Plains, a storm was not only an obstacle, but also an opportunity for a surprise attack. In conditions of poor visibility, they could approach the enemy camp within throwing distance of a tomahawk. The enemy, exhausted by the cold and confident in their safety, was often caught off guard. The blizzard muffled the sounds of footsteps and cries, making the attack swift and devastating to the enemy's morale. War in winter required special courage and incredible physical fitness from everyone. Even during rest periods, the warriors never stopped watching for changes in the weather and sounds around them. Their hearing was attuned to the slightest deviations from the natural sound of the wind in the bare branches. Any suspicious crunch or change in the rhythm of the blizzard forced them to instantly go on alert. Survival in the open air required constant tension of all senses and intuition. They lived in a world where a mistake cost a life, and vigilance was the only guarantee of longevity. It was these unique qualities that made the indigenous peoples of America the most difficult opponents for regular armies. Soldiers in blue uniforms often died of cold before they even entered their first serious battle. The Indians, on the other hand, felt at home in the winter prairie, using every snowdrift as a fortress. In the next chapter, we will discuss how they found water where everything had turned to ice. This will be another discovery that will make you look at the history of the Wild West in a new way. What you are about to learn will change your perception of the warriors of the Wild West. In addition to passive concealment, the Indians were masters of actively misleading their pursuers. They did not simply try to hide their tracks, but deliberately created false trails. It was a sophisticated intellectual game in which the lives of an entire squad were at stake. In the next chapter, you will learn how they coped with this terrible weather. One of the most effective techniques was to move along rocky ridges where the snow was blown away by the wind. The warriors could cover considerable distances without leaving a single clear footprint. Then they would suddenly veer off to the side, taking long leaps onto solid ground. Their pursuers would continue straight ahead, losing the trail in the open space. The wind quickly swept away any random scratches on the rocks, making the path invisible. Sometimes the Indians used the technique of moving backwards along their own tracks. They would walk several hundred meters and then carefully leave the trail and disappear into thick vegetation. To the untrained eye, it looked as if the group had simply vanished into thin air. In a blizzard, such maneuvers became virtually impossible to detect. Cavalry soldiers often found themselves at a dead end, unable to understand the logic of the enemy's movements. To disorient the enemy, the group was also divided into small parts. Each group went in its own direction, creating a fan of barely noticeable paths. The pursuers were forced to either split up or choose one false path out of 10. Meanwhile, the main forces gathered at a prearranged safe location. This tactic exhausted the enemy physically and morally. Cunning was also evident in the use of natural obstacles, such as frozen riverbeds. Ice does not retain clear footprints, especially when covered with a thin layer of fresh snow. Warriors could travel for miles across the water before coming ashore in an unexpected place. The cavalry often wasted time searching the banks for the group's exit point. Each such delay gave the Indians a head start of several hours. In wooded areas, the Indians could move across fallen trees without touching the ground. This required exceptional balance and excellent physical fitness from each participant. Such trails were completely invisible to those who were used to looking only at their feet. The wind and falling snow quickly hid any minor damage to the bark or branches. Nature itself helped those who knew its secret ways. Sometimes discarded objects or deliberately left marks were used to deceive. These could be scraps of leather or broken arrows pointing in the wrong direction. Pursuers, finding such evidence, enthusiastically rushed along the false trail. In reality, the group was moving in the opposite direction, maintaining complete silence. Such traps worked flawlessly against overly confident trackers. Particular attention was paid to camouflaging places of short rest in the forest or mountains. Fires were never lit in open areas so that the smoke would not give away their position. The Indians used small depressions, which were covered with branches and snow. From the outside, such a shelter looked like an ordinary snowdrift or a natural mound. The heat from the coals was retained inside for a long time, without exposing the warriors. Even sound could be a tool of deception in the hands of an experienced prairie warrior. The Indians imitated the cries of birds or the howls of coyotes to coordinate their actions in a storm. Soldiers mistook these sounds for the usual noises of the wild and let their guard down. In this way, messages about the enemy's location or orders to retreat were transmitted. Silence and stealth were the main allies in the struggle for survival. Do you think modern tracking technology could detect a group using such methods? This is a fundamental question to consider in the context of modern navigation. Ancient knowledge often proves to be more reliable than sophisticated devices in extreme conditions. In the next chapter, we will talk about how Native Americans found the energy to live in the icy desert. Stay tuned for the continuation of our story about the great masters of invisible warfare. What if I told you that one of the main tools of warfare was ordinary water? In the frozen prairie, access to liquid water was a matter of life and death. The Indians knew the location of all the hidden sources that did not freeze even in the most severe frosts. This knowledge was passed down from generation to generation as a sacred secret of each tribe. Control over water allowed them to preserve their strength where others died of thirst. The search for water began with observing animal behavior and the condition of vegetation. Certain types of shrubs and trees grow only where groundwater is close to the surface. Even under a thick layer of snow, the Indians could accurately determine the location for digging a temporary well. Moisture often remained in deep crevices in rocks, protected from direct exposure to frost. The ability to extract water from under the ice was a critically important skill. In the absence of open sources, Native Americans used clean snow, but consumed it with caution. They knew that eating wet snow quickly cooled the body and caused frostbite of the internal organs. The snow was first melted in leather containers or on flat stones by the fire. Pine needles or bark were often added to the water to enrich it with vitamins and add flavor. This drink supported the immune system and provided an extra boost of energy. Control over known water sources gave a huge advantage in guerrilla warfare. The Indians could deliberately spoil the water in wells before retreating, making it undrinkable. The pursuing cavalry unit, which was counting on resting by the water, found itself in a critical situation. Without water, horses quickly lost their pace, and soldiers became easy prey for ambushes. It was a war of attrition against the enemy's resources. The warriors themselves trained themselves to get by with minimal amounts of moisture for long periods of time. They used special breathing techniques that reduced moisture loss through the lungs. Constant chewing of certain roots helped stimulate salivation and quench thirst. This allowed them to make long journeys without frequent stops at water sources. Their endurance was the result of discipline and a deep understanding of their body's capabilities. In winter, water was also used to strengthen defensive positions and shelter walls. Snow fortifications doused with water turned into ice shields that were difficult to penetrate with bullets. Ice also served as an excellent light reflector, helping to illuminate the interior of a snow house. Such ice fortresses were virtually invulnerable to the small arms of the time. Water became a building material that was as strong as stone. Interestingly, the Indians knew how to store water in leather bags by burying them deep in the snow. The snow acted as a thermos, preventing the water from freezing completely for some time. This allowed them to have a ready supply of moisture during rapid changes of position. Leather bags were light and easy to transport on horses or by hand. Mobility and access to resources were the keys to success in harsh conditions. During long stops, the Indians built special shelters to collect meltwater from tree branches. Even a few drops of moisture were important when there was an icy drought around. Mastery of these techniques made the tribes of the Great Plains virtually self-sufficient in the winter desert. They did not depend on supply lines and could operate over vast territories. This aroused sincere admiration and fear among U.S. Army officers. A special skill was the ability to distinguish the quality of ice on rivers and lakes in the dark. Warriors navigated by the sound of a staff striking the ice or changes in the color of the ice crust. They knew where the ice was strong enough to support a horseman and where it was dangerous. This knowledge allowed them to cross water barriers where the enemy was afraid to set foot. Ice was a road for them, not an obstacle in winter warfare. The ability to manage water resources demonstrated the deep connection of indigenous peoples to their land. Every river and stream was a living thing that could bring life or death. They never took more than they needed and treated nature with the utmost respect. This balance between consumption and conservation allowed them to thrive in these lands for centuries. Their experience remains a unique example of the harmonious coexistence of humans in a harsh environment. When the Indians did decide to go into battle, they chose the ideal terrain for it. Mountain passes and narrow canyons became places where nature helped the defenders. A small detachment of warriors could hold back superior enemy forces by using the advantage of height and surprise. In the next chapter, you will learn how they provided themselves with food away from camp. This is a basic question that researchers of Native American life often ask. Ambushes in the canyon were planned taking into account the direction of the wind and the lighting of the slopes. Warriors took up positions on the ridges long before the enemy appeared, blending in with the rocks. The cavalry soldiers, trapped in a narrow space, were unable to deploy their formation for effective firing. Not only arrows rained down on them from above, but also specially prepared stone avalanches. The panic in the enemy ranks was the best ally for the attacking Indians. Winter storms added to the chaos of such battles, obscuring the numbers and positions of the defenders. The echoes of gunfire in the narrow gorges disoriented the soldiers, creating the illusion of being surrounded by a large army. The Indians took advantage of this, making lightning-fast sorties and then immediately disappearing into the snow. The cavalry's horses became frightened and uncontrollable on the slippery trails. The battle turned into a struggle for survival in an icy bag. Particular attention was paid to blocking escape roads with tree or ice barriers. The Indians cut down tree trunks in advance so that they would fall at the right moment with a single blow. The trap snapped shut instantly, depriving the enemy of maneuverability and the possibility of a quick retreat. Each such location was carefully scouted and prepared for defense. Knowledge of their native land gave the warriors a tactical advantage that was difficult to overestimate. In mountain passes, the Indians also used a system of signals with mirrors or smoke to coordinate attacks. Even in a blizzard, experienced observers could see flashes of light at certain frequencies. This allowed them to strike simultaneously from several sides, causing maximum damage. The army often could not understand how the Indians communicated with each other at such distances. The synchronization of their actions made their attacks particularly devastating. After the attack was over, the warriors used secret trails to quickly retreat deep into the mountains. These paths were too narrow and dangerous for cavalry horses and soldiers' heavy equipment. The Indians moved easily and confidently along ledges above precipices, where every wrong step could mean death. Their bodies had been trained for such crossings from early childhood through harsh trials. The mountains were their home, but for outsiders they were a hostile labyrinth. The psychological effect of such ambushes was enormous and undermined the morale of the regular troops. The soldiers began to fear every gorge and every turn of the mountain path, expecting an attack. The constant tension exhausted people no less than physical exertion and cold. Many officers noted that it was practically impossible to fight an invisible enemy in the mountains. Fear of the unknown became the army's main enemy. Do you think knowledge of the terrain is a decisive factor in modern warfare? We will continue to explore the tactics of indigenous peoples in the following sections of our story. Ahead of us lies a story about how Native Americans maintained their logistics in conditions of complete isolation. This will help you better understand the scale of their achievements in the art of survival. Stay with us to learn the true price of freedom on the Great Plains. The success of Native American military operations in winter depended largely on a unique supply system. They did not have centralized warehouses or long supply trains that could be easy targets for the enemy. Instead, they used a network of hidden caches with provisions and spare equipment throughout the territory. These caches were camouflaged as ordinary rocks or buried deep in the ground. Knowing their exact location allowed the troops to operate autonomously for many months. The basis of a warrior's diet on the march was pemmican, a concentrated mixture of meat, fat, and dried berries. This product had enormous energy value and could be stored for years without losing its properties. A small piece of pemmican was enough to sustain a person's strength throughout a day of active travel. Pemmican did not require cooking over a fire, which allowed for secrecy during the march. It was the ideal food for guerrilla warfare in harsh climatic conditions. Weapons and ammunition were also distributed to secret collection points known only to experienced warriors. The Indians skillfully repaired their guns and bows right in the field, using materials at hand. They knew how to make arrows and arrowheads from natural stone or metal fragments found on the battlefield. The self-sufficiency of each warrior made the entire unit virtually invulnerable to supply cuts. The enemy simply could not find the backbone that needed to be broken for victory. Horses were an integral part of the logistics system and also needed special care in winter. The Indians knew what types of bark and dry grass could serve as feed for horses when the ground was covered with snow. Northern breeds of horses were trained to find food on their own by digging through snowdrifts with their hooves. Man and horse formed a single system capable of surviving in the harshest conditions of the prairie. Proper distribution of the load on the animals allowed them to make rapid advances of hundreds of miles. Clothing and footwear were constantly renewed with trophies and hunting spoils during the campaign. The Indians knew how to quickly process animal skins using simple tools and natural preservatives. New moccasins or a warm cape could be made in a single stop in the forest. This allowed the warriors to always remain in dry and warm clothes, despite the wear and tear of their equipment. The ability to sew and repair clothes was a mandatory skill for every man in the tribe. Information logistics were provided by a system of messengers and visual signals over long distances. Information about the movement of U.S. troops was transmitted from one observation point to another in a matter of hours. This allowed the Indians to always be one step ahead of the regular army, avoiding unfavorable encounters. The speed of data transmission was comparable to the modern means of communication of that time. Reconnaissance was the key to saving lives and successful defense. Women and children in winter camps also contributed to the overall supply system. They were engaged in gathering firewood, tanning hides, and preparing food supplies for the men who went on campaigns. The rear of the Indian army was mobile and dispersed, making it virtually impossible to attack. Tribal unity and the common goal of survival made this structure incredibly strong. Every member of the community understood their role and responsibility during this difficult time. The exchange of resources between friendly tribes also helped to maintain a high level of logistics. The Indians could obtain ammunition or horses from their allies in exchange for furs or other valuables. Trade routes existed even in the midst of hostilities, passing through the most remote corners of the mountains and forests. This created a unified network of resistance across the vast expanses of North America. Mutual aid was the basis for the survival of indigenous peoples against external threats. The logistics of the Invisible Army were a masterpiece of folk ingenuity and adaptability to harsh conditions. It proves that knowledge of nature and organization can replace modern factories and railways. The Indians created a system that worked flawlessly for centuries in complete isolation. Their experience remains a subject of study for anyone interested in military history and survival. In the following chapters, we will take a closer look at the details of their daily life in a blizzard. The winter raid was the pinnacle of the military art of the Indians of the Great Plains and forests. It was not a chaotic attack, but a carefully planned operation that took full advantage of the weather. Blizzards and severe frost served as the perfect cover, concealing the warriors' approach to their target. At such moments, the enemy usually lost their vigilance, seeking only warmth and rest in their fortifications. The attack began precisely when nature seemed most hostile to humans. Reconnaissance before the raid was conducted for several days or even weeks before the start of the operation. Experienced trackers studied the guard change schedule, the location of the stables, and the weak points in the fort's defenses. They could lie motionless in the snow for hours, watching every movement inside the enemy camp. The information obtained was analyzed by the chiefs and elders to choose the ideal moment for the attack. The accuracy of the data was the key to minimizing losses among the attacking warriors. The attack often took place in the pre-dawn hours, when people were in the deepest and heaviest sleep. The Indians used silent weapons, bows and knives, to take out the guards on the outer perimeter. Only after ensuring safe passage did firearms and battle cries come into play. The suddenness of the attack caused panic, preventing the soldiers from organizing a coordinated response. The main goal of such raids was often to capture horses and supplies, rather than to directly destroy the enemy. The enemy's horses were a priority target, as their loss deprived the army of mobility for a long time. The Indians skillfully led away entire herds right under the noses of the guards, using their knowledge of animal psychology. The frightened horses easily obeyed the experienced riders, who led them away into the darkness and snowy mist. After successfully capturing the horses, the detachment quickly retreated, not waiting for the main enemy forces to approach. Speed was the main factor in the success of such daring raids. The retreat after the raid was planned as carefully as the attack on the fortification itself. The group was divided into several parts, going in different directions along pre-planned false trails. This forced the pursuers to scatter their forces and waste time in snow-covered forests and ravines. The warriors used their knowledge of the terrain to their advantage, retreating along paths that were inaccessible to heavy cavalry. The storm quickly covered their tracks, making pursuit virtually impossible for the soldiers. The psychological effect of the winter raids was devastating for the morale of the regular troops. The soldiers understood that even the strong walls of the fort did not guarantee safety in this harsh season. The fear of a sudden attack from the darkness and blizzard led to chronic fatigue and nervous breakdowns. Discipline in the garrisons often declined, and the number of deserters grew after each such incident. The Indians successfully used fear as a weapon of mass destruction. During their raids, the Indians also sought to capture valuable tools such as axes, saws, and blacksmithing equipment. These items were essential for sustaining life in winter camps and repairing the tribe's equipment. Each tool captured increased the people's chances of surviving the winter in the forests. The technological advantage of white people often turned against them through such trophies. War was a means of redistributing vital resources in conditions of scarcity. After returning from a successful raid, modest celebrations were held in the camp in honor of the heroes. The spoils were distributed among the widows, the elderly, and the most needy families of the tribe. Fairness in the distribution of trophies was the key to internal unity and stability of the entire community. The personal ambitions of warriors always took a back seat to the interests of the survival of the whole group during this period. Collectivism was the basis of the social architecture of Indian society for centuries. The anatomy of a raid demonstrates the high level of strategic thinking and tactical training of indigenous peoples. They knew how to fight not with numbers, but with the ability to use every factor of the environment to their advantage. Winter warfare was a natural state for them, to which they were perfectly adapted. In the next chapter, we will discuss why the regular army was unable to cope with this challenge for so long. We will analyze the systemic errors of the U.S. command in the winter campaigns in the West. The main reason for the failure of the American cavalry in winter pursuits was cumbersome logistics and heavy equipment. Soldiers carried dozens of kilograms of cargo on themselves and their horses, which quickly exhausted the animals. Heavy greatcoats, carbines, ammunition, and provisions made the rider unwieldy in deep snow. Cavalry horses, often unaccustomed to severe frosts, suffered from starvation and hoof diseases. Meanwhile, the Indians moved lightly, maintaining high maneuverability. The U.S. Army supply system depended on long caravans of mules and wagons, which often got stuck in snowdrifts. Cutting these supply lines was an easy task for the Indians, requiring little effort. Soldiers in the field quickly found themselves without food, ammunition, or warm clothing in the depths of winter. The army turned into a crowd of freezing people, thinking only of saving their own lives. The Indians, on the other hand, always had their hidden supplies of pemmican and warm furs at hand. Cavalry officers often lacked wilderness survival skills and were completely dependent on their hired scouts. If a scout died or proved unfaithful, the entire detachment became helpless in the icy wilderness. The Indians, on the other hand, were trained from childhood to navigate and find resources in the most extreme circumstances. Each warrior was his own scout, navigator, and expert in forest survival. This made their army decentralized and invulnerable to a decapitating blow. The difference in motivation also played a key role in the outcome of the winter clashes on the Great Plains. For a soldier, it was a paid service in the harsh and unfamiliar conditions of a foreign land. For an Indian, it was a battle for life itself, for their children, and for the right to own the land of their ancestors. A deep understanding of what they were fighting for gave the warriors incredible strength of spirit and fortitude. They were willing to endure any hardship to achieve their sacred goal of freedom. The soldiers' winter uniforms often looked good on parade, but were completely unsuitable for real warfare in the mountains. Tight boots led to rapid frostbite, and uncomfortable greatcoats restricted movement in battle. Native American clothing made of deer and bison skin was soft, light, and ideal for retaining body heat. It did not rustle when moving and allowed the warrior to blend into the surrounding landscape at dusk. The comfort and functionality of Native American equipment were far superior to Army standards. As a result, the cavalry often returned to their forts without ever catching up with their elusive enemy in the winter prairie. These fruitless campaigns cost the government a fortune and led to the demoralization of the troops. The Indians, meanwhile, continued their usual way of life, successfully enduring the hardships of the winter months in the open air. Their ability to win without major battles was a unique page in the history of warfare on the American continent. In the next chapter, we will summarize our study of Indian survival tactics. The Indians' victories were achieved not only through physical strength and tactics, but also through psychological pressure. They knew how to instill awe in their enemies by exploiting the superstitions and fears inherent in every person in the forest. The appearance of warriors out of nowhere in the midst of a blizzard created an aura of supernatural beings, immune to cold and death. This deprived soldiers of confidence in their weapons and made them doubt the reality of what was happening. The psyche of a person exhausted by the cold was an easy target for manipulation by experienced warriors. The use of war paint, even in winter, had a deep psychological meaning for both sides of the conflict. For the warrior, it was protection and a connection to the spirits of their ancestors, granting strength and invulnerability in battle. For the enemy, a painted face suddenly emerging from a snowstorm looked like the face of death itself. The contrast of bright colors against the backdrop of white silence created a powerful visual shock that paralyzed the will to resist. The aesthetics of war were inextricably linked to its effectiveness on the battlefield in the mountains. The nighttime sounds made by the Indians around the enemy camp were part of a well-thought-out strategy of psychological exhaustion. Imitation of animal voices, which normally should not be heard at this time of year, caused alarm among the soldiers. The constant expectation of an attack, which might not happen that night, deprived people of the necessary sleep and rest. By morning, the detachment was so psychologically exhausted that it could not continue the pursuit. The Indians defeated the enemy before they even fired the first arrow or bullet. The Indians also skillfully demonstrated their superior survival skills in front of the enemy. They could deliberately leave barefoot tracks in the snow or traces of light camps where the soldiers froze. This showed the newcomers how alien and helpless they were in this harsh and beautiful land. Such silent pressure undermined the soldiers' belief in the civilizational superiority of their nation and army. Awareness of their own weakness was the first step toward defeat in a protracted conflict. The attitude toward death and pain in indigenous cultures was also a powerful psychological factor in the Winter War. Warriors showed remarkable contempt for danger, taking risks for the honor of their tribe and their families. Their calmness in the face of death in the icy wilderness inspired superstitious fear and secret respect in their enemies. Soldiers saw their opponents as people of a different order, capable of enduring what was impossible for ordinary people. This created a mental barrier that the army was never able to completely overcome. In summary, it can be said that the survival of the Indians in winter storms was a complex achievement of their culture. It was a combination of physical endurance, tactical cunning, and a deep spiritual connection to their land. They proved that humans can be stronger than even the harshest elements if they live in harmony with their laws. Their legacy is not only military tactics, but also an example of an incredible will to live and preserve their identity. The history of these people will forever remain a symbol of courage and true mastery of survival in the wild. We hope that this detailed analysis of the tactics and daily life of the indigenous peoples of America has helped you better understand their unique world. The story of the Native Americans' survival in endless winter storms is a great example of human ingenuity and fortitude. What other aspects of the life of the Great Plains tribes or the peoples of the North would you like to see in our future videos? Write your suggestions in the comments, and we will be sure to select the most interesting topics for new scripts. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the continuation of our historical research. Your support helps us preserve the memory of the great cultures of the past.